On June 14th, 1969, the Martin family were enjoying a relaxing Father's Day weekend in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It was the Martins and another family that were camping near Spence Field, located just off a section of the Appalachian Trail. The air was warm, the mountain was clear, and it was the kind of afternoon where nothing felt urgent. But what would follow from this seemingly normal day would remain one of the more startling unsolved missing children's cases of its time. Some stories blur the line between reality and the unfamiliar. They whisper in the night, waiting to be heard. So let's listen. Let's talk spooky. Welcome back, spooky souls, to a brand new episode of Let's Talk Spooky. This week, we're going to explore one of the most unexplained mountain ranges in all of North America. Now, because its stories and legends are so vast, we're going to make this a two-part series. But before we get into where we're headed this week, I want to give a thank you out to all of you who wished me a happy birthday. It's so amazing to see this community grow, and making these episodes for you has been something I've dreamed of doing for a really long time. So to see it become a reality is just so exciting. So thank you, everybody who's listening, and thank you for those who are joining. Now, if you are just joining us and you've stumbled across our show, welcome. Here at Let's Talk Spooky, we explore the stories that linger in the quiet corners of the world, or perhaps, as tonight's episode will show, a little deeper in the woods. If that sounds like your vibe, please take a moment to follow and rate this show. Not only does it allow you to never miss a new episode or a bonus episode, but it will support our show and it helps us grow and find new spooky people. And if you haven't guessed yet where we're headed tonight, I think you're going to love it. We are going to the Appalachian Trail to dive into some of the strangest missing person cases that have been documented, as well as some very real serial killers. So grab your flashlight, stay on the trail, and let's talk spooky. Before we talk about disappearances and serial killers, we need to talk about where we are. Appalachia isn't a single town located on a map. It's a region that stretches roughly 2,000 miles along the eastern United States. The Appalachian Mountains run from northern Georgia through Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, New York, and yes, all the way to parts of Canada. At the heart of it lies the Appalachian Trail, a continuous footpath spanning about 2,100 miles from Georgia to Maine. And those who have hiked the trail pass through the dense hardwood forests, highly elevated areas, fog-heavy ridges, and deep hollows can tell you that it's a dangerous walk. Cell service can disappear quickly, weather can change without warning. Essentially, you never know what the land will give you. Because Appalachia is ancient. Its geography is actually older than the Rocky Mountains. But the mountains have been worn down, rounded by heavy forested areas, and they don't look as dramatic as they once were. But they still hold an energy to them that runs deep within its roots. For many of you who have heard about Appalachia, which I'm sure many of you listening have, you've likely heard of its creatures and feral people, its dense folklore, and rules of the woods that stretch across generations of those who have lived within its borders. And we're going to get to that, I promise. But today's episode, I want to focus on some of the experiences of those who have hiked the trail and came out the other side, and explore the cases of those who didn't. On Father's Day weekend, 1969, Dennis Martin was just 6 years old. Him and his family had planned a camping trip with a few other families at the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. The Martins were experienced outdoors people. They weren't lost tourists unfamiliar with the terrain. And this was a planned trip in a well-traveled area of the park. That afternoon, Dennis and several other children were playing hide and seek in the woods near their campsite. The adults were all nearby, and there was no reason to suspect that anything would change in a heartbeat. Witnesses said that Dennis ran ahead of a few other children and hid behind a set of bushes, maybe 100 meters away from his campsite. He had intended to jump out and surprise his father, but he never did. When he didn't reappear after a few moments of playing the game, the adults began to call his name. At first, it seemed like a child playing a trick, perhaps trying to keep the game going a little longer than he should have. But as the minutes stretched on with no response, it became apparent that something was terribly wrong. Family members and friends searched the immediate area, and by evening the park rangers had been notified. What followed became one of the largest search efforts in the Smoky Mountain National Park's history. More than 1,400 people participated over the following days. Green Berets from Fort Bragg were brought to assist. Tracking dogs combed the terrain, helicopters scanned above, volunteers searched ravines, ridgelines, stream beds, and even the dense undergrowth across more than 50 square miles. But there was no trace of Dennis. No confirmed footprints, no torn clothing, no clear sign of an animal attack. He seemed to have simply stepped behind the bushes and vanished. The only potential lead was a report of a family driving near the park boundary who claimed they saw a disheveled man carrying something over his shoulders. Now, this lead was investigated extensively, but no evidence was ever linked, and no charges were ever filed in connection with Dennis. The weather conditions that day were stable. There were no sudden storms, visibility was clear, and Dennis had been gone for such a short amount of time before the search began. It was baffling how he could have just disappeared. Over the years, several explanations have been proposed: an accidental fall, an animal, an abduction, but as of this time, none have been proven. Dennis Martin was never found, and over 5 decades later, this case remains officially unsolved. In a region so vast and layered as Appalachia, it doesn't take much distance to become invisible. And nearly 7 years after Dennis disappeared, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park saw another young person vanish in almost the same region under very similar circumstances. October 8th, 1976, 16-year-old Trenny Gibson was on a school trip to Clingmans Dome, the highest point in Tennessee, near the Appalachian Trail corridor. She was hiking with 38 other classmates, not including teachers. The weather was cool but stable, visibility was clear, and witnesses reported seeing Trenny walking slightly ahead of the group along the trail. At one point, she was said to even have turned around and spoken briefly to another student, smiling and seeming happy and carefree. And then, moments later, she was just gone. Shortly after, students and teachers noticed that she was no longer visible ahead of them on the path. That's when the alert was made to the park rangers. Teachers and students began searching almost immediately. Park officials joined shortly after, and the search efforts expanded across the surrounding terrain. As with Dennis, the landscape is complicated, and Clingmans Dome is a heavily forested area beyond the paved Clingmans Dome is a heavily forested area beyond its paved observation point. Dense growth, steep slopes, thick brush makes it nearly impossible to see short distances off the trail. And sadly, despite extensive search efforts, no confirmed physical evidence of Trenny was ever located. And to this day, it remains an active missing person case, with no evidence or no persons located. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park is one of the most visited national parks in the United States. Its trails are well mapped, its paths are maintained, and its overlooks are photographed on a daily basis. But step just beyond the main trail, and the landscape changes quickly. The forest begins to thicken around you, the sound becomes uneven and distorted, and the Appalachian terrain folds into itself. Rock shelves hidden beneath leaves, sinkholes, steep drop-offs concealed by undergrowth. A person can move out of sight in seconds and become completely lost. But not all those who go missing are never found again. And some stories aren't of the landscape, but what lurks just beyond the path. In mid-November 2001, 52-year-old Louise Chaput drove from her home in Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada, into the White Mountains of New Hampshire for what was meant to be a quiet solo hiking weekend. Louise was a psychologist, a mother, and a very seasoned outdoors enthusiast who loved remote trails and the peace of the forest around her. On the afternoon of November 15th, she arrived at Pinkham Grant and stopped at the Appalachian Mountain Club Visitor Center near Mount Washington. An employee there remembered seeing her and remembered her asking for recommendations for a short trail that she could finish before dusk. Louise set out with the employee's suggestion in mind and planned to check in later that evening at Joe Dodge Lodge, where she had already had a room reserved. But when she didn't return by November 19th, her concerned family reported her missing. That same day, authorities found her silver Ford Focus parked at the trailhead where she had left it. Inside were her hiking shoes, her water, and even a chocolate that she had always carried with her. But other items, such as her backpack, sleeping bag, and car keys, were gone. Then, tragically, on November 22nd, search crews found her body located between 100 to 200 yards off the Glen Boulder Trail, a short offshoot from the Appalachian corridor. She had been reportedly stabbed multiple times. Investigators struggled with the case from the start. The location was deep forested terrain. Days had passed before her body was discovered, giving any suspects days of separation and obscurity. Authorities characterized the killing as a seemingly random act of violence, unusual for the region, but there was no clear connection between Louise and any local person within the area. Despite decades passing and repeated calls for leads, no arrest has ever been made in her case, and her murder remains an open cold case with the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit. But what makes Louise's story so particularly haunting isn't just that she vanished into the wilderness, it's that she did it from a place where other hikers had seen her, a place that was well-traveled, familiar, and yet ended up being hidden such a short distance off trail. Her disappearance wasn't a disappearance at all, but a violent attack that was unprovoked and unexplained. And violent deaths like this, unfortunately, the terrain can help conceal for years. Someone disappears in Appalachia, the explanations don't arrive always at once. Sometimes maybe they slipped. Maybe they wandered too far off the trail. Or maybe they followed the wrong trailhead. But the mountains are steep. The undergrowth is thick. A person can move 20 feet off trail and vanish completely from sight. Search teams often say panic makes people unpredictable. Terrain makes them invisible. And these mountains are older than maps. They hollow, distort, and change the way we hear and see things around us. The fog can settle heavy and suddenly, and even experienced hikers can become turned around. And there are stories that are passed down by Appalachian towns that are warnings more than legends. Don't wander after dusk. Don't leave the trail alone. And if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Between 2007 and 2008, Gary Hilton committed a series of murders in national forests in Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida, areas that are known to be connected to the Appalachian corridor. His victims included Meredith Emerson, 29-year-old hiker who disappeared near Blood Mountain in Georgia, John and Irene Byrant, an elderly couple found murdered in North Carolina's National Forest, and Sheil Dunlap, whose body was discovered in Florida. Investigators determined that Hilton had targeted individuals in remote wooded areas, often approaching them while they were hiking. He moved across state lines and operated in environments that were isolated and limited to immediate intervention. There are several other missing and murdered persons, to which authorities are still investigating as a potential link to Hilton, but at this time none have been confirmed. In 2008, Gary Hilton was arrested and convicted and is currently serving life sentences in both Georgia and North Carolina, along with the death sentence in Florida. However, his case did confirm the reality that the wilderness search and rescue professionals have long acknowledged. Remote environments can be an opportunity, not for accidental disappearance, but for criminal activity as well. The Appalachian Trail sees millions of visitors each year. Violent crimes along the trail remain statistically rare, but there are documented cases like Hilton's that demonstrate that human danger, while not uncommon, is also not theoretical. In the context of missing person investigations, but these layers of fear are not just confined to the woods. Interstate 40 stretches more than 2,500 miles into the Appalachia. It cuts through the Smoky Mountains and it threads past trailheads, national forests, and small mountain communities. Unlike Appalachian Trail, though, the I-40 never sleeps. Truck traffic moves through the night, rest stops glow under fluorescent lights, and cars pass without stopping. Most drivers are simply passing through. But over the decades, law enforcement agencies have begun to notice something about this major interstate corridor that begs the question, is there something more happening here? Bodies were found near highway exits, victims discovered in wooded areas, not far from rest stops, and in some cases, vehicles were left behind with no sign of the person at all. The FBI's Highway Serial Killing Incentive identified hundreds of homicide victims whose cases share a very similar factor: the proximity to the major highway. The interstate systems like the I-40 became logistical connectors, allowing offenders to move between states quickly with little coordination between jurisdictions. But that doesn't necessarily mean the I-40 is uniquely dangerous, because millions of people travel its roads safely every year. But in Appalachia, the corridor to the woods and the highway often sit side by side, because just as easily as a person can disappear into the trees, they can disappear into traffic as well. And sometimes investigators are left standing between the two, trying to determine which direction the story is going to go. FBI has confirmed that there are over 500 active serial killers working this remote interstate. From that, there is an estimated 850 murders that potentially fall into the patterns associated with interstate dumping, as well as 200 of those suspected murders still remaining unsolved today. In the context of missing persons investigations, it creates a layer that when someone disappears in remote terrain, investigators have to consider both environmental and criminal possibilities, often limited physical evidence to distinguish the difference between the two of them. But there are those who think there's another explanation for Appalachian disappearances. And this theory surfaces again and again. And it's the idea of feral people. The phrase suggests hidden communities deep within the mountains and off-grid, unrecorded, and occasionally crossing paths with hikers who wander a little bit too far off marked trails. Now, there is no verified evidence of organized feral groups responsible for missing persons, Law enforcement agencies have never confirmed this, and park services have never documented it either. And yet, the idea seems to persist. But to understand why, you have to look at the region itself. Appalachia is a long history of geographical isolation. Before modern roads, certain mountain hollows were difficult to reach, and families sometimes lived in relative seclusion for generations. Poverty, terrain, and limited infrastructure created communities that felt almost outside time, even hidden. That historical isolation slowly morphed into public imagination. Add that documented existence of wild recluses and individuals who live in the forest for years at a time. It's not unheard of that if one solitary figure could survive off the land and avoid detection, that entire communities might be able to as well. Then there's the landscape itself. Appalachia is layered in abandoned coal mines, collapsed homesteads, forgotten lodging roads, and overgrown hunting camps. On satellite maps, there are stretches of forest that appear endless. Search teams routinely describe how difficult and quickly terrain can swallow visibility, and how someone could step 20 feet into underbush and vanish completely out of sight. The physical setting makes theory plausible. In fact, if you layer over the map of United States cave systems over a map of missing peoples, well, it gets a little unsettling because they almost line up exactly. But is it real? Or just a creepy coincidence? In the 2010s, online forums began weaving together unsolved disappearances, survivalist culture, and speculative wilderness mythology. Stories multiplied, threads connected cases, and feral people became the shorthand explanation for why so many would go missing without a trace. A narrative that bridges between the missing and the uncertainty. When theories about hidden people in the mountains resurfaced, they often trace themselves back to older unsolved cases. Could Dennis Martin have been a victim of a feral person? A nearby family, often referred to as the Key family, did tell authorities that they had seen a disheveled man in the woods carrying something over his shoulder not long after Dennis disappeared. Now, as we mentioned before, the report was investigated extensively, and there was no evidence of this man or any person matching their description in the area. But if it was really a feral person who took Dennis, and remember this is all theory-based, but if it was, maybe the reason why they were never located is because Appalachia contains some of the most extensive cave systems in North America. Limestone terrain across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia have produced thousands of mapped caves, and I'm sure many more unmapped ones as well. Some systems even stretch for miles underground. Some have narrow entrances hidden by bushes. Some are even sinkholes that are only detected when it's too late. So, is it completely unthinkable that someone could have taken, or he could have fallen into one of those cave systems and never been found? Or is there a world deep within the ground that we have no idea exists? Official reports list injury, exposure, or human violence. But the mountains and towns sometimes offer another explanation, one that is passed down through generations of told stories and warnings that are meant to be followed, such as, not every deer is a deer. Not every whistle comes from a person. Not every footsteps in the leaves belongs to a hiker. And if you hear something in the woods or see something, no, you didn't. Thank you for joining me on tonight's tour of the Appalachian Trail. Now, next week's episode, we're going to dive deeper into the folklore, into the creatures and cryptids and skinwalkers and all the ancient lore that is literally woven into the very fabric of the Appalachian Mountains. And if you've enjoyed tonight's episode, please take a moment to leave a review, follow, and comment. Say hi. If you want to share any of your own experiences of Appalachia, or maybe tales of these stories that have been passed down to you, I would love to hear them. You can follow me on our socials at Let's Talk Spooky Pod on TikTok and Let's Talk Spooky on Instagram. You can also email us at letstalkspookypodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, stay curious and stay spooky.